Well, Yani, we've had quite a great journey here so far this weekend. I've seen a lot of amazing things. We had your amazing cohort, Phantom, right over there. We had that amazing Mortal Kombat reunion panel yesterday. And I'll tell you, I have to say, we've been doing some great work for the Raiden Science Foundation all along the way.
Yeah, I think it's been great. It's been an amazing turnout. I think the panel yesterday had some really cool questions too, especially from the audience as well. It's nice to see everybody turn up in support of the Raiden Science Foundation.
And for all that support, I am so privileged to know that we are about to see something very special, something very unique, and from someone that I think is going to give us an amazing experience.
I'm very excited. I think everybody else here is very excited too. This is something that it's an amazing opportunity to get to see John Tobias himself, the co-creator of Mortal Kombat, the original lore master behind Mortal Kombat. Welcome, John.
Ladies and gentlemen, John, everyone. Let's give a big round of applause. John, thank you for joining us.
Great. Thanks for coming. I have never done this in my entire life. Have I drawn anything in front of a group of people? So this is a first-time experience for me as much as it is for all of you guys. And I guess this is kind of a seminar, so I'll talk a little bit about maybe my drawing technique. I'll talk about the character that I'm drawing. Well, actually, I think we're going to keep that a secret.
Yeah, let's keep it a secret, right?
It's Yanni's idea to keep it a secret, so you guys will figure it out as I draw. I think you'll figure it out pretty quickly who I'm drawing.
Only true Mortal Kombat fans can figure this out, right?
Yeah, maybe. I think you just have to be sort of somewhat familiar with the series to understand who I'm drawing, but you'll know it pretty quick. I guess I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing. Maybe I'll talk about the initial design on the original characters. One thing I've spoken about this before. One thing about the original series is that we were, in many ways, sort of the ability of the characters that we created were somewhat. There was a ceiling regarding the complexity of the designs. So the pixelization of the sprites on screen just meant that we couldn't do anything too detailed. And so because of that, I think that somewhat influenced the simplicity of the designs of the original characters, which I think was a good thing because it kind of forced us to adhere to some very basic design principles. So it's from something as simple as I think the triangular shape of Raiden's hat to the V shape of the ninjas and their tunics. I think all that stuff led to sort of the iconic nature of what the characters became. So it was I think everything just kind of came together almost by accident, but a lot of it was planning. So I'll start my drawing here. All right. Usually when I learned this at life drawing class, Sal DeVita and I were telling war stories about going to art school. But the one thing that I typically do is a gesture, and usually it helps kind of give even if you're doing just a stance, which is what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to try to replicate. If anybody has seen the original character illustrations that I used to do, you saw them in all the magazines back in the 90s and stuff. I'm going to try to replicate that look. But usually I start with kind of a gesture, and it's to make sure that the characters don't look too stiff even when they're standing. So I'll start with a gesture, usually just a simple shape, kind of like this. Oops, let me get my lead going. Just kind of like this. I do a lot of erasing when I draw. But I'll start with a simple gesture. So this is going to be sort of the stance of the figure. I'll just do something simple like that. And then I'll get moving. So I'll start with the simple shapes. This is going to be the head of the character. And I scribble a lot when I draw. And my line work tends to, when you see the finished product, it tends to be fairly clean. A lot of times I'll do my pencil drawing, and then I'll work on a light box, and I'll put a piece of paper on top of it, and I'll draw with marker on top of that, and then I'll color on top of that. But here I'm just going to do a black and white. So I'll start with pencil, and then I'll ink it with my markers. So here's my starting with my simple figure shape. There we go. And I'll usually just work my way down the body. And it'll start to take shape, I think, as we go here, and you'll start to see it take shape. But again, I start with that gesture, and I just use that to sort of direct, I think, the pose that I'm creating. There we go.
John, how do you go about designing characters from scratch? Like, what's the sort of core aspects maybe that you try to establish? You've mentioned, for example, Raiden's hat and such. Like, does that go into your mind before you start the drawing? There's something you want to have that's iconic?
Yeah. Of course, yeah. Usually we'll start with sort of a basic idea on who the character is going to be. And a lot of times with their characters, it's a lot about the characterization, of the character, and that'll sort of dictate the visual qualities that we try to design with the character. But the MK characters kind of started that way. We had general ideas on kind of what we thought we wanted them to be, and then I just sort of worked it out with sketches. The first Mortal Kombat game, we did very little in terms of concept art, almost none. And in fact, I think if you see any drawings from the Mortal Kombat 1 characters, they were little scribbles I did in a notebook. And that was the extent of what we had done. And then we just put together costume pieces to kind of replicate the little scribbles that we did. In the later games, I think starting with MK2, we had costume makers sort of develop the actual fabrics of the costumes that the characters wore. And so for that, I would actually do an illustration kind of like I'm doing here. But I usually drew on 8.5 by 11, like just copy paper. Back then, we didn't have scanners. It was so long ago. We didn't have scanners, but we had a copy machine, and I liked to color on the copies that we made. So everything I did was 8.5 by 11, which for me was really small, because when I went to art school, I was used to working very large, on large pieces of paper. Even this is a little small for me. And then actually, prior to working in games, and even the comic book work that I did, I actually did graffiti art for a while. And you can imagine, when I did that, I spray painted on giant walls, and so I was used to working big, and so over time everything got smaller and smaller and smaller, and I was finally working on little 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and for me, like I said, it was tiny. And you tend to tighten up when you're drawing that small, use technical pencils and things like that, but I prefer to work large. I'll do my best. I know we have an hour here, but I'll do my best to finish this drawing, so it'll start to come together, and I think you guys will, again, be able to kind of guess who it is I'm drawing.
So, you're obviously mostly known for being a video game designer and writer because, your co-creation of a little series called Mortal Kombat. But now, obviously, we have on display the fact that you're a comic book artist and a graphic designer, and you've mentioned you were doing graffiti and such when you were younger. Where did that sort of desire stem from to become a comic book artist?
I started drawing from my earliest memories. So I was probably 3 years old with a crayon drawing something. And one of my earliest inspirations was just watching cartoons on TV, and I would draw the cartoons that I saw, or I would draw movies that I saw. But the Batman television series with Adam West, they used to play reruns of it, and I watched that a lot, and there were Spider-Man cartoons and the old Marvel cartoons. Those are my earliest inspirations, even before I started reading comic books, and that led to me reading comic books and then, of course, wanting to become a comic book artist.
You're mentioning the legacy of DC characters. Obviously, Mortal Kombat has a very strong connection to the DC universe with some crossovers. Do you think that some of that early inspiration between the comic book characters came to influence the way you designed the Mortal Kombat characters?
Absolutely. Yeah, yesterday, I think on the panel, we talked about this a little bit, but I think everything I do and have created is just kind of a product of the things that I consumed as a kid growing up. And even the style that I draw, I think was somewhat influenced by the comic book artists that I admired when I was a kid. And it inevitably comes back, even if it's not consciously, sometimes it's subconsciously, these influences that sort of you experience just in the media that you consume. As you grow.
You're saying you take that early influence and such, and it obviously helps shape your style. And we can see that in Mortal Kombat. You've got Big Trouble in Little China, Bruce Lee Enter the Dragon, even I think Fujin, the God of Wind. Sort of resembling Thor to an extent. Do you feel like you have taken those influences and tried to sort of adapt them in your own style and had them evolve in a way that's become a core identity of your art style now?
So yes, I think everything sort of that I consumed, I think influenced the style of drawing. I think those influences they weren't, I think, as direct as some people think. So when we talk about Bruce Lee, or we talk about Big Trouble in Little China being influenced, there was the lightning character, I think, in that film. But those are more kind of afterthoughts for us. It was like there was the initial inspiration for Raiden actually came from a trip that I took to the Field Museum in Chicago. And I was actually doing a little bit of research for MK, and I had my camera, and when we worked at Midway, we always carried our video cameras with us, and we videotaped textures and things. But anyway, there was a little statue there. It was a statue of Raiden, the God of Thunder, and he was quite different from the Raiden that we know. But I remember he was kind of like a demon with drums on his back, that was the initial influence. And when I read that, and I thought, first of all, I thought the name Raiden was cool, and I thought, oh my God, he's a God of Thunder. How do we not put that in our game? And then I probably talked to Ed about the idea, and at some point, we paid homage to the character Lightning, or was it Lightning or Wind? What was he called? Lightning, yeah, from Big Trouble in Little China. We're like, we got to put this triangular-shaped hat on his head. So it was more like paying homage to this movie that I saw, I think in high school was when that film came out. But that was the inspiration for using the hat. And of course, the moment we put the triangular hat on his head and the fact that he had lightning, everybody put two and two together and understood what the reference was.
You know, I have to say right now, taking a look at the progress we're making on this drawing, I'm kind of taken away at how quickly and also just how detailed and gorgeous it is. Isn't this amazing so far, everybody? John, you mentioned movies, and I actually want to ask something I've been wanting to ask yesterday and today, because I really became attached to the Mortal Kombat franchise when it hit the big screen, the Mortal Kombat movie in 1995. I thought that was a great movie. I loved the way that I saw those characters that were on the video game and they kind of came to life. How must have it felt for you to see those characters that you created suddenly appear on the big screen?
That was, well, the whole experience was surreal, you know, for me. And I think that, first of all, when the game became as popular as it did, that was a pleasant surprise. And of course, Ed and I were always so busy working on the next game, we had very little time to kind of, I think, appreciate the effect that Mortal Kombat was having in pop culture at the time. So we were kind of aware of its popularity, but we were so busy working on the next iteration of the game that we didn't really have time to kind of soak it up. So even when the film came out, I think it really for me wasn't until Ed and I had a chance to visit the set when they were filming and we got to meet the actors and such, that we understood sort of the enormity of it. Just the big set that they built and the production and everything was it was really surreal. And then, you know, the other thing I would say for me, kind of in hindsight, that I appreciate now kind of more than ever is I remember when I was a little kid, I was talking to my uncle, one of my uncles, and I was always drawing when I was little, and I remember telling him that he asked me, you know, hey, so what do you want to draw or what do you want to do? And I said, oh, I want to draw Spider-Man. You know, I was like, I want to draw the Spider-Man comic book, you know. And he said to me, somebody already created Spider-Man. He's like, you gotta create something new. And I remember that kind of thinking about that at the time. It's like, oh, okay, I guess he's right. Somebody already did create Spider-Man. And but never, you know, if I could go back in time and meet me when I was, you know, 8 years old and say, hey, you know, by the way, you're going to create something that's going to inspire people and it's going to become its own thing, I wouldn't have believed it. And I'm super blessed that I had got to play a part in the creation of something I think that's resonated for, you know, 30 years at this point. And I'm super blessed by that. And I think in hindsight, never did I think that I would create something that would have sort of this longevity, and I think this effect on other people. Yesterday, I got to meet you know, a bunch of fans and stuff, and a few artists who talk about me inspiring them, and that's a big deal for me because I remember feeling the same way about the comic book artists that I had admired when I was you know, an artist kind of growing up, and so that I think has a big effect, and that even today I think still I pinch myself when I think about being in the position that I'm in.
Do you feel like that advice from your uncle sort of stuck with you subconsciously to the point that you ended up co-create Mortal Kombat?
Maybe, because even when I was, I think when I was about that age, I actually illustrated comic books professionally for a couple of years before I started working in games. There was a cartoon called The Real Ghostbusters, and I illustrated the comic book adaptation of that for about a year and a half, and I used it to pay my way through college. But even after that, even when I started working at Midway, I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to work at Midway for a little bit. I'm going to save money, and I'm either going to go back to school and become a proper animator, and I wanted to, you know, animate for Disney cartoons, or I'm going to move to New York and become a famous comic book artist. And I remember working on, the first game I worked on was Smash TV, and I still thought, I'm gonna save my money, and I'm still gonna become a comic book artist and stop working on this video game nonsense. But I actually really love games. I mean, my two loves in life growing up were always comic books and video games, and film, of course. But games really started to, I mean, things started to kind of snowball for me, and I really started to appreciate just the opportunity to work on games. And I'm just blessed. I think I was blessed to be able to work on just to be able to do anything creative. I think I was very lucky with. But anyway, what I was going to get at was, even when I was working at Midway at the time, I still thought, hey, at some point I'm going to go and do Captain America or something. And in fact, when I was working on Smash TV, I was still going to comic book conventions and showing my portfolio to people. And there was an editor at Marvel who was interested in hiring me to draw Captain America at the time. Unfortunately, the money that they paid for comic book art was very little. And so I was making just barely more at Midway at the time. So I decided to stick with what I was doing at Midway. And by the time they had come about, I think I had just started Mortal Kombat. By the time that they had said, hey, what do you think about illustrating comic books for us? The editor was a guy by the name of Mark Grunwald. And I decided to stick with games, fortunately. And the next game that I did was actually Mortal Kombat. So.
Honestly, one thing that I've always kind of been a little curious, John, and I'd love to dive into it, is the ninjas that are in the franchise and the color schemes that we came out with. You know, we have a character like Scorpion. Sub-Zero makes sense, right?
Sure.
We've got the cold aesthetic, the blue, but Scorpion being yellow, and then kind of the evolution of that with the different ninjas as they went along. Where do those choices come, especially in the choice of color paletting and how that maybe influences character design and nuances and, say, the ninja gear? Any insights in there?
Yeah, well, the first characters, we knew that, Ed and I knew that we needed to do something to sort of deal with our memory limitations in the old coin-op games.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right, that's right. So the idea was, hey, any sort of palette swapping we could do might benefit us. And I had just, I worked on a game called Smash TV. And on Smash TV, there were these little, the two player characters, we called them Blue Guy and Red Guy. And really, I animated one collection of sprites, and then we tinted the colors to get two. So we knew that we could do similar with Mortal Kombat. So that, I think, was sort of the impetus of the idea was, if we could create a character that we could tint the palettes on and create an additional character for it, that would benefit us. And so I believe I sketched the ninjas and I kind of wrote a little story for them. Then we decided, hey, they're perfect for doing the palette swapping. They're masked, so we wouldn't have to do any kind of head swapping or whatnot. So that's kind of how it started. And then the choice of yellow, actually, I think had to do with I went to a costume shop and saw, the sketch I did was a character with this V-shaped tunic. And at the costume shop, coincidentally, they had this Genghis Khan costume that was similar to the shape that I had sketched. And so, but I think it had kind of side panels on the costume that we ended up kind of cutting off. So we bought that costume, I kind of manipulated it a little bit, I cut off the sides of it, and we used that as our ninja costume, and that costume happened to be yellow. So that's how Scorpion started with yellow. But Ed and I had discussed the idea of one of the characters being themed with fire and one being themed with ice. So we kept Scorpion yellow, and then I think we knew a natural, because the ice-themed character, we were going to tint his tunic blue. That's how kind of that started, and then snowballed from there. And then the other ninja colors, that kind of started with, I created sort of a bunch of different palettes, and then I gave Ed a collection of colors. And then when actually Ed he created Reptile. Reptile was the first sort of secret character. But Ed is the one who created the idea of Reptile and chose green and used green as the color. And then I think from every game after that, I again gave Ed sort of a rainbow palette of colors. And then he selected the colors and then named the characters. And I actually didn't write the stories for those characters until kind of after the fact. But the idea of like even Rain, that came from Ed. So Ed was a big Prince fan, used the purple palette and called the character Rain.
I was actually curious because you were talking about the Scorpion outfit and everything, and was there any sort of potential inspiration from the fact that you get some sort of black and yellow Scorpions at all as well? Or is that just a coincidence?
That's just coincidence. Yeah, we just kind of, I think everything kind of snowballed once it worked out for us, so.
one thing too, I think a lot of fans have attached to Yani is the what the fans call the cat ears on the ninja hoods. I mean, yeah, John, even you're giving a little chuckle at that. Where did that come from? Was that in the same costume shop as the long panels and the V-neck?
No, so the actually the ninja cowl that we had, I didn't really have the cat ears. That actually came about when there was a comic book, a collector's edition comic book that I had drawn that we sold through the game. And when I illustrated that comic book, the version of the characters in that comic were more, I think, my idealized version of what these characters would look like if, you know, if they were perfect. And so that's what that represented. And for some reason, I drew the cowls. I mean, you can see me, I think you can kind of start to guess what I'm drawing here. But as I illustrated those characters, I did this sort of this folded over piece you see me drawing right here. And that's how the kind of the cat ears came about. And that's sort of I think my version of the ninjas, they always have the cat ears on them. But that's kind of how that started, was really with the comic book illustration that I did for the Pack-In comic book.
And I will say as well, something you said before, and I loved hearing it, especially with the palette swapping and the early technologies, that restrictions breed creativity, working within what you have, you know. But what's good about us, Yani, is that we have an amazing Cleveland gaming classic audience, and we're actually going to have the opportunity to open up for a little bit of Q&A as well. If you don't mind, John, we'd love to maybe draw and get some of those questions from our audience as well. So we have a few more here lined up on our side, but if anyone is interested in asking a question to John, specifically about character design and drawing, I have Molly, and of course we've got the great Phantom over here. They're going to be walking around, and if you have a question, feel free to go and flag them down, and we'll see if we can get that question in. Well, but Yani, do you have another question here to keep this going?
Well, my first question is actually to the crowd. Have you guys figured out what is being drawn yet? Any guesses? We got one scorpion, two scorpions. Anyone else? Rain?
I hear rain.
I'm hoping it's rain.
I can see a grin over there on John, but we'll see if maybe the prophecy comes to light.
So I do have a sort of roundabout question. John, you've mentioned in the past that you would have liked to age the main characters and potentially shift the roster to their children, as we've sort of seen with what happened in Mortal Kombat X. How does it feel to see the story of the franchise you helped establish continue to evolve without your input? And are you ever surprised by the developments like a fan might be now that you're no longer directly involved?
Yeah, well, I think I'm like everyone else now, so always looking forward to the next version of the game. And the things that they're capable of doing today compared to the technology that we had back at the time is just amazing. And I think that when you watch sort of the complexity of the story modes today and the fact that they're actually doing proper story exposition. So, you know, back in the day, we didn't have dialogue. There was no way for the characters to exchange dialogue with each other. And so everything we did was sort of implicit. So it was implied story. So the choices we made were very specific. I mean, it was all about telling as much story as we could without actual story exposition. But of course, today it's quite different. Today, there's dialogue exchanges and there's these super dramatic cutscenes and things that they're able to do, but very entertaining to watch. And like I say, I think I'm like everybody else, just awed at the quality, I think, of the work that's being done and watching things come to life. It's funny because I think when the first Mortal Kombat film was released, one of my theories on why that film did so well was because players were able to see for the first time fully realized versions of these characters that we had only been able to allude to in the games and the comics and things that we had done prior. And so it was super exciting, I think, for people to see everything come to life. Now, of course, with each iteration of the game, everything's brought to life just so so beautifully. And I almost think that a film today is somewhat redundant, only because of the quality level of the work that they're doing on on the games themselves.
Yeah, I would say so. And I also, why we didn't have dialogue, we of course had some classic text lines. Acknowledges power.
Acknowledges power. I mean, get over here. Of course.
But speaking of getting over here, I'm going to get over to my friend Molly out there in the audience. And John, I think we might have a question here for you.
Over here, Todd's got a great question. Todd? Hey, John. Yesterday at the reunion panel, you mentioned how you love that like a character like Noob Saibot. It helps resonate people to know that you're still kind of were involved at some point with this. What makes you think a character like Noob still to this day resonates with people? Because he just started out as a completely like blackened sprite with Scorpion's moves. What makes you think that people till to this day, like he's one of the most requested characters for modern Mortal Kombat in your own thoughts?
I would guess that a portion of it has to do with his playability, so the things that he does in the new iterations of the game. I think that it's his characterization in the new game is very cool. His relationship with the two Sub-Zero brothers, I think, is a key component to that. But I think it really has a lot to do with the work that's being done, on the new games. The work that NetherRealm is doing. The new Saibot designs are amazing. They're just beautifully designed, and I think that stuff really helps keep the character alive and helps keep the character relevant. But I think again that has a lot to do with it. Was just sort of the modern day iterations of the character have been so great that it's continued to resonate with players.
Awesome, thank you.
That's a great question.
Utah.
Yani, yeah, thank you, Molly. And what I really appreciated too, and I'm just going to kind of echo a little bit of the sentiment. I think it's a combination, John, of the design, the mysteriousness of him, along with also what I would say some great gameplay elements that was put into Noob. Even though I had a pretty bad matchup against him, I'm not a very good record against Noob Saibot, but he's just so cool in the way that he kind of does his thing.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see now as well with the sort of evolution, as you mentioned, John, like how he's changed with an entirely new design, a very chaotic design, which lends itself to just the entire core aspect of his character changing, rather than being a NetherRealm focused, being a Chaos Realm focused character, and just seeing that in the actual gameplay.
Well, it looks like I have my friend Phantom. Do I have someone asking a question back there?
Yeah, I'm here with Vert, and Vert's got a question for you, John.
Are there any canceled ninjas that you have?
I don't think so. I think we've used every color in the rainbow. At this point, I don't remember one that a ninja that we did that didn't actually make it into the game. So purple, red.
Are we still not
yellow.
waiting for Pink Floyd?
Pink? Oh, maybe we don't have a pink one yet, do we?
I'll also take different shades of turquoise as well. I've always been curious about that as well. Thank you for that question. That's a good one. Molly.
Ryan over here has got a great question.
Hey, John. Regarding Mortal Kombat, when it went from Ultimate MK3 Trilogy to Mortal Kombat 4 and you all transitioned to 3D, were there any challenges or really cool things that you kind of experienced from an art side, going from a two-dimensional game, moving into that 3D plane?
I don't remember any specifics in terms of the choices of the character designs that we did. I mean, I think if anything, we were able to get a little bit more detailed with the character designs on MK4. One thing about MK4, though, I remember that the body parts were kind of separated. We didn't do actual skinning back then, and I vaguely remember us maybe having discussions even back on MK3 about the transition to 3D, because maybe Virtua Fighter had been released at the time, and I think other teams in the studio were making the transition to 3D. I think maybe NFL Blitz was in development while we were working on MK3. Maybe I might have that wrong. But anyway, the idea of representing our characters in 3D, I remember at first, 3D was so crude at the time. It was very blocky, and I thought there's no way we're going to do our characters justice, in given the number of polygons that we had to use. But by the time we got to MK4, the development system that we were working on, I think allowed us to do a little bit more than we would have been able to have done had we done it a few years prior to that. And then of course, I think with the later games, as you can see, the character designs have become more and more detailed, only because we're able, the folks are able to kind of inject more and more detail in terms of the number of polys and the level of detail that they can inject in the textures and things.
For sure, and as the detail evolves, certainly seeing those like little designs, but you have to appreciate the originals. I mean, the spirit of inspiration is what brings it all from where it was. And I think we're going to go back over to Phantom as we have another question in the queue.
Yeah, that's right. I am over here with Headlock Gaming. Headlock, go ahead.
Yes, I was very curious. Do you have a favorite animation that you've worked on, or maybe a favorite animation that you have framed at home that you've worked on, or do you have anything that you've worked on in the past that you look at as your favorite?
You know, I don't know. I think, you know, it's funny. So obviously the Mortal Kombat art or the work that I had done on it is so iconic. So there's inevitably there's, you know, a bunch of favorites there. But I think when I think back at my work at Midway, probably some of my favorite work was done on a game called Smash TV, only because it was the first thing that I had worked on. And so I would say there was a character in Smash TV called Mutoid Man, and that's one of my favorites.
No, I remember that. I remember going against a Mutoid Man or two, and I was like, oh gosh. Actually, in fact, I was just playing a little bit of Smash TV over in the arcade earlier, Yanni.
The game ending now, after this.
I mean, I'm kind of feeling inspired. Well, let's go over to Molly, who has a question on deck.
Awesome. We've got the beautiful Joey and his parents. He's got a question. What do you got, Joey?
Who was the first person you drew?
Great question.
First person I drew like ever?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I've been drawing since I was like a wee lad, so probably when I was 3 years old and stuff. About 3 years old. I would guess one of the first things I drew was probably Batman. Only because I was such a fan of the old TV series. And it's funny because I used to get really excited about watching TV or seeing movies. And a lot of times we'd go to my folks would take us to the movies, and I would come home so excited and energized, I would start to draw images of the movie that I had just seen. And the one thing that I saved, I still have, is after we saw Star Wars the first time, I think I was like 7 years old, and I got home and I tried to draw like an adaptation of Star Wars as a comic, and it was what I remembered as a kid of the movie I saw, but it's super entertaining. But I think Batman was probably the first superhero character I drew, I would bet.
Thank you.
Well, looks like we're still probing for another question out there, but Yanni, I know you have quite a lot of things that you're curious about.
Yeah, definitely. You've mentioned the sort of changing of designs as the game went on and such. We've talked about Noob Saibot, for example, and I know it's been mentioned in the past, for example, that Cabal in MK3, the idea was originally to give him a sort of trench coat, which didn't really make it in until the 3D era. How does it feel to be able to see like how intricate these designs have become from the good old days of palette swaps?
You know, the one thing I think, and I think maybe I mentioned this earlier, about the earlier designs is because of the limitations of the hardware that we were working on at the time, it sort of forced us into making choices regarding character design to sort of adhere to kind of a simplicity to their design. And I think that is in part, or that had a lot to do, I think, with the iconic nature of whenever we think of the ninjas, for instance, there's always the color scheme, there's the shape of the tunic, I think even the new designs try to kind of adhere to the originals. And I think a lot of that has to do with the iconic nature, of them. But again, I think that the design principles that we used in creating sort of the earlier characters, I think, ended up sort of benefiting us in sort of making the characters as iconic as they are now. So whenever you think of Sub-Zero and Scorpion, you think of the V shape of their tunic, you think of the color schemes. Raiden, of course, has the hat, and you could imagine those characters without those things. So. Yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, there's a sort of beauty in the simplicity which has been able to evolve over time.
Yeah.
Tell me, sir, what question do you have here?
I was just wondering if there's ever any plans for a Mortal Kombat pinball machine.
Oh, I think suddenly we have some excitement over a Mortal Kombat pinball machine. I like it.
I vaguely remember at the time being asked about a Mortal Kombat pinball machine. There was an artist, it was a fellow by the name of Greg Ferris, who kind of ran the pinball machine art department at Williams Electronics at the time. And I remember him asking me if they do a Mortal Kombat pinball machine, would I be interested in drawing the back glass?
Yes, please.
Of course I was, but they actually never ended up doing that for I don't know what reasons. But I would love an MK. I love pinball, and I would love an MK pinball machine. And Ed coincidentally used to program pinball machines, so a lot of connectivity there between the work that we did and of course the company that we worked for at the time.
So, John, you left midway through Special Forces, and Special Forces led to characters like Tasya, No Face, and Tremor. How did it feel seeing, for example, Tremor make it into the main game in Mortal Kombat X so many years later?
Oh, that was awesome. I actually loved Tremor as a concept, and I remember thinking of like, okay, what's the next iteration of our ninja that we could create? And I thought, because Sub-Zero kind of had this elemental quality to him, and he was a Lin Kuei, I thought, okay, well, here's another Lin Kuei that you didn't know about, a fella by the name of Tremor, who's kind of a bigger. The idea was he was a bigger, bulkier ninja, all, very muscular. I don't know what he turned out like or if he even ended up in the Special Forces game that was eventually released. But I think the iteration of him that they did in MKX was fantastic. It was kind of what I had imagined he could potentially become, I think, when we created him back then. So that was awesome to see.
Wow. I love when those stories come round circle. It really is something. Yeah. Phantom, it looks like we have another question out there.
Yeah, actually, we got a follow-up question to that from Evil Emperor X over here.
Oh, I remember that name. I remember that name.
So there was, a good while back, an action-adventure Mortal Kombat game that many folks may know here, and I think it's one of the greatest Mortal Kombat games of all time. When are we finally going to get a Special Forces 2?
Actually, that's a question for Ed.
I think if we start crowdfunding right now, we might be able to make some traction. What do you think, Yani?
I think so, but let's focus on the actual donations first to Raiden Science Foundation. Then we can focus on Special Forces 2 maybe, or even Mythologies 2, right?
I don't know, but it looks like over here on the side, Molly has another question.
I've got the lovely Logan over here. What's your question, darling?
Hi, my question is, what is a character that got cut that you regret cutting the most?
Great question.
I don't remember. I don't think we really cut many characters. We were so frugal, and everything was so tight in terms of scheduling that we rarely threw anything out. But the one thing that I remember that was sort of painful for us was there was an iteration we did of Jax on MK2. And it was, we had, the initial design I did was Jax sort of wearing a karate gi with cut-off sleeves. It's kind of a yellow and black thing in homage to the Game of Death costume that Bruce Lee had worn. And so anyway, we actually videotaped John Parrish in that costume, got through the entire session, and I digitized the sprites, cut them up, and was just not happy with the way that it looked. And I remember calling Ed into my office, and we kind of looked at it together. And I just remember saying I did not like it, and we decided to reshoot the character entirely. So we threw out all the sprites and started from scratch, and I redesigned the costume. It ended up being sort of the shirtless, black, red, and white pants that you see him wearing in the game now, or in MK2 that he ended up wearing. But that we actually threw out, and that was very painful for us because we did work on a tight schedule, and we didn't like throwing things away, but that was one that we decided not to use.
Time is definitely a warrior's tool. Right over here, we've got, looks like Phantom's continuing to find some good questions out there.
Yeah, I got another question over here from Tyler. Tyler, go ahead.
John, what's the story on Midway bringing you back to do the prequel comic for Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe?
Oh, that was amazing. The story was actually Ed had called me and asked if I would be interested in doing something with them related, to the game in the form of a comic book. And for me, that was like an absolute dream come true, because it was amazing, sort of being able to illustrate the characters that I had had a hand in creating, and along with characters that I had admired growing up. So Superman, and I mentioned Batman was probably one of the first characters I'd ever drawn. And so just having the opportunity to kind of illustrate them professionally was a dream come true for me. But the story was as simple as they were developing the game, they had decided that they wanted to do a comic book, and so Ed had thought of me and reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested, and of course I was 100% interested, so.
I mean, that's a dream right there.
Yeah.
That actually leads me to a follow-up question. Could you ever see such a thing happening again? Could we potentially see John Tobias and Ed Boon working together on Mortal Kombat at any point, even in a collaboration?
I get asked that all the time, and I always say, maybe somewhere in an alternate universe there's a version of me that is still working on the game, but it's not this one. And I don't know, you never say never, but
Sure.
We're very busy, and those guys certainly don't need my help right now. They're doing a fantastic job.
Looks like we got some more questions coming from Phantom over there.
Yes, I do. I got a question over here from Justin regarding, just you have a wide catalog of characters. So, Justin, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I was just curious, out of the original game, which character was the most labor intensive to create?
So from the first game, which Goro was the most labor-intensive character that we worked on, and that was because, of course, it was we hand animated a stop-motion miniature, of course, but that was a lot of work.
But it is such a notable character that stands out. Like things in promotion, like I walk by those arcade cabinets, and when I see them, I'm like, okay, yes, I get it. It had that visceral reaction. Doesn't matter where it is graphically or in between. It definitely resonates. Whoa, do you have another one over there, Phantom?
Yeah, I do. I got one more, and this one is a little off topic, but not quite when you consider, John, you made Mortal Kombat. So, Coasty, go ahead.
Thanks, brother. So, John, you recently stated that you had watched the television series Mortal Kombat Conquest, and you rather really enjoyed the portrayal of Shang Tsung by Bruce Locke. Is there anything in particular that really stood out to you with that performance, and is there any other highlights from the series that really struck a high note with you?
Well, regarding Bruce Locke, I mean, I think that especially coming off of Akira Tagawa's performance in the first MK film, I remember thinking, how are we gonna top that? How are you gonna find another Shang Tsung? And I thought that the actor who portrayed him in the TV series actually held his own. He did pretty good.
I thought so too.
Yeah, and so that was a pleasant surprise, I think, for me. But in terms of the series, any standouts? I think it was when Noob Saibot showed up. That was pretty amazing and surreal.
Thank you for that question, and that leads me to another follow-up. How would you compare Conquest to, say, Legacy? Did you get a chance to check out Legacy, and what were your thoughts on it?
I did see Legacy, yeah. A bit of a deviation, I think, from our story at the time, but Legacy was pretty good. It was. I thought it was a legit production. It looked great. There was a sequence with the cyber ninjas fighting each other. I thought that was amazing. A great fight.
It's fight in the series, I think.
Yeah. I think there was I think it was it Legacy? There was an actor named Matt Mullins who portrayed Johnny Cage?
Yeah, that was Matt Mullins. Before, in the second season, it was Casper Van Dien.
Right, okay, so Matt Mullins, who played Johnny Cage in the I guess it was the first season of that show. Coincidentally, Matt Mullins did mocap. I worked on a game called Tao Feng for Microsoft.
Woo!
When I left, I left midway. And Matt Mullins was one of our mocap actors. And so it was crazy seeing him as Johnny Cage all those years later. I guess it was kind of a coincidence. And then Matt was actually trained by a fellow by the name of Mike Chatterattabut, who also did mocap for us for Tao Feng. And Mike Chat, Ed and I actually met when I think he was 12 years old or something at the time. And Ed and I did some training at a health club, and it was actually Ho-Sung Pak who we were working with. But Ho-Sung Pak, I think, trained Mike Chat for a little bit when he was very young, and then Mike Chat grew up, and coincidentally, we got connected with Mike, I think through maybe his agent, or we were working with a martial artist who knew Mike and brought him on, and then Mike told me the story of meeting us way back when, and then Mike trained Matt Mullins, who when I worked with him was like 20 years old or something, and then of course years later he portrayed Johnny Cage in Legacy, so small world.
Small world indeed. I mean, I guess that kind of connects to also some of those Disney roots that you saw with It's a Small World. But I'm not going to get into that song and get that earworm in everyone's ear. But I would like to kind of go to the concept of being an animator, a drawer, an artist. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are also exploring that world. What bit of advice would you give to someone that is starting to get into the world of hand drawing, of character design, something that maybe the foresight of experience would give someone a good navigational direction to continue to take that journey?
I would say consume a lot of media and take in everything and let it all kind of influence you. And then I would say just practice and proliferation. It's like I think the more you draw, the better you get. The more you draw, the more you develop sort of your unique style. And I think that at some point, I think in your career, you kind of give in to the stylistic qualities of the way you draw, and you stop trying to be like someone else, and you just accept who you are in the way that you draw, and it's unique to you. So whenever you see my drawings, it really is just now, at this point, this is just how I draw. I'm not trying to replicate anything else that I'm seeing. I'm just drawing the way that I draw. But I think that only comes through just years and years of practice. And I don't draw as much now as I wish I could. But I think a lot of what you see me do today just came from years and years of practice.
Would you say your style has sort of evolved? Like now, looking back at your old art, say your original art for Scorpion, and comparing it to what you're doing now, spoiler to everybody, come on, you figured it out from the kunai. Would you say that there's much of a difference in how you approach it and how it looks, the end result?
I don't know if I approach the base of what I do is kind of the same as I've always done. And I think that has a lot to do with, I went to art school, and a lot of what I know I learned, I was taught. And then just over the years, it kind of evolves into your own thing. But really, when I draw right now, I almost zone out. Like I can talk about what I'm doing, but a lot of it is just instinct at this point, and it really is just kind of what comes out of me.
Do you think you could sum up in a few words or sentences, what do you see your drawing style as? Is it fanciful? Is it realistic? Is it visceral? Is there? And it's kind of hard to put one's styling into words. I know, like when I do it, I really go into hyperbole. Is there a way that you can kind of describe what you see your drawing style as today?
I've never thought of answering that question. I have no idea. I mean, I think that there's probably, again, subconsciously, the stylistic qualities of my drawing probably have a lot to do with the comic book artists that I grew up reading. And I remember being a certain age, and all I needed to see was a drawing, and I could tell you which artist drew it. And I think that probably subconsciously there's a lot of that stuff in what I do. So I bet you, I've heard people mention like, oh, you draw like this person, or you draw like that person. And it's probably true. I mean, I bet you subconsciously I looked at their art over the years, and it just found its way into the work that I do.
I think if there were two words that we could say, is this style, I think it's John Tobias. I think that's what the words would be, would it not, Yani?
That's perfect, yep. I think, John, would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's me. 2 letters, M-E.
John, do you have a favorite Mortal Kombat character to draw?
To draw?
Yep.
Maybe the ninjas. They're the easiest, which is why I'm drawing them now. I don't know if I have a favorite. I think it's probably the ninjas only because of the visual nature. They're so iconic. I love drawing Goro. Goro's a lot of fun. And Raiden's fun too. I finally got the hat down. I figured out how to draw the hat. I actually just drew Raiden. They're gonna auction off. I drew on a PlayStation 5. I drew a headshot of Raiden.
Oh, that's awesome.
They're gonna auction that off. But I love drawing Raiden. But Goro, Raiden, and the ninjas I think are my favorite because I think they're the most visually iconic.
It is with the efforts of people like you, John, and of course the strength of characters like Raiden and of course Scorpion and Goro. it is that strength that allows us to continue to push forward with the Raiden Science Foundation. And once more, I encourage everyone to use that QR code or head over to the booth and take a look. There's a lot of great things they have on offer, both in silent auction and raffle, and we're giving away a lot of those things very soon in our next event, the final push event for Raiden Science Foundation. I know that's what brought all of us out here for this reunion panel. So anything you could do, small, large, bit part in the raffle, get in the silent auction, they all add up to help us combat rare diseases with genetic research and strength with all the funding underneath.
Any support is appreciated. What you can do, QR code here right now, you could win this, well, Scorpion.
Yeah, I mean, I am here for the Raiden Science Foundation specifically, so, we appreciate any donations. I know that they're going to raffle this drawing off. So I didn't get a chance to finish this. I think we're at time, but I will finish this illustration. They're going to raffle it off, so that's fantastic. And then they're auctioning off some other great items. So.
That's right. So we ask everyone to please stick around here in the main stage, because in about 30 minutes, we're going to start to do some of those raffles and giveaways. But before we go any further, I would ask everyone to please give a massive round of applause to our amazing artist and great friend of the Raiden Science Foundation, John Tobias. Thank you so much.